Militer di Myanmar dan Papua sama saja. Tak puas serang warga dan tak pula sayang nyawa. Kan tak pula saat malam yang berpulang akan datang. Lihat kepulan asap.
Thank you to everyone joining us. I know you're hearing an unfamiliar voice in an unfamiliar setting, but rest assured this is the Inside Myanmar podcast, and we have something different and special for you today. As many will be aware, the situation in Myanmar is escalating, and day by day innocent civilians are being killed, maimed, starved, and forced from their homes. The military continues their campaign of terror, and we need funds to support the many civilian victims of their relentless attacks. To this end, let me welcome you to the Art Against Tyranny auction. I'm sure to some people that sounds somewhat jarring. It's natural to think that now, the middle of the greatest crisis that Myanmar has ever faced, is not the time for art, but let me, and the outstanding artists that we have speaking with us today, convince you that now is exactly the time for art. Art is often seen as a luxury, the reserve of the wealthy and the fortunate, a refined pursuit far removed from the grit and blood of war, terror, and death. But art is the raw essence of human experience, distilled beyond words and thoughts, directly tapping into our emotions. It is for this reason that art and revolution go hand in hand. Art allows us to express our most primal feelings, and in Myanmar, those feelings are a burning desire for freedom, democracy, justice, peace, and an end to the suffering. It is through art that rappers, painters, poets, graffiti artists, video editors, and creatives of all media and all walks of life have expressed their opposition to the junta and emboldened their compatriots to continue the march to victory. It is through art that the true horror and carnage of the military's reign of terror can be conveyed to people all over the world. Art is a vital medium through which people have their voices heard and with which we can empower people the world over to put pressure on the military to release their death grip on the nation and give power back to the people. Today, a New York City art gallery has graciously donated its space for free to showcase revolutionary art from Myanmar artists to highlight the plight of the Myanmar people, and artists from all around the world united in using art to fight back against dictatorship, oppression, terror, and tyranny. Some pieces on display today are biting, others are hauntingly beautiful, but all of it is inspiring. You will be seeing or hearing some of these works today, and we will be talking to some of the talented young artists about their work, their philosophy, and their hope for the future. Right now, the people of Myanmar desperately need help. In a country of over 50 million, every 9th person is suffering food shortages. In the coming months, this is expected to increase to 26 million. Over 2 million people have already been displaced, fighting off starvation, COVID, and exposure with no food, no medicine, and no shelter, completely at the mercy of nature and the military. Thousands upon thousands of brave government workers, police, and even soldiers have abandoned the military machine, refusing to work for a dictatorship, but in doing so, have lost their income and many have been forced to flee arrest. The people are in dire need of help, and to provide that help, we need funds. To that end, our main event will be the 2nd annual Artists Against Tyranny charity art auction, held over 2 days, the 11th and the 12th of this month, Eastern US time, or the 12th and 13th if you are in the Eastern Hemisphere. Many talented artists are putting their art up for auction to raise funds and support their compatriots in the struggle for freedom. Other artists have donated their time in live performances, which will be broadcast as part of our live show, which will be well worth checking out. Today, we are all part of art as a tool for opposing tyranny by raising awareness of the military's crimes while also raising funds to support their victims. This promises to be an incredible event, raising money for a truly worthy cause. We hope that anybody listening will take the time to see what's on offer, spread the word, and maybe buy an exquisite work of art for a good cause. The more money we can raise, the more lives we can save, and the sooner we can end the military's campaign of death and destruction. So please, stick with us as we hear these talented artists tell us their stories in their own words, and follow the auction and live show at the links provided.
Yeah. สวัสดี from Thailand มีผู้นำไร้อย่างอาย3 นิ้ว against the sky ไร้เงา must do or die ยุคเก่าพวกมึงหลบไปนี่เวลาของยุคใหม่ watch now the game is on เผด็จการพวกมึงจบไป you fight with the wrong generation we fight for a real revolution you ain't the one but we the many so cut the crap cause you ain't shit now we count down from 10 to 1 no more prostrating to a shameless we toss your love in the bin yes man justice will win
could you tell us a little bit about the activism work that you do, how you got into activism, and the impact that you're trying to have on not just individual people, but on sort of society more generally?
The activism work that I do, I think it's highly influenced by how I was raised. I was raised with a lot of ex-political prisoners, a lot of freedom fighters, ex-guerrilla fighters, reporters. So I think that is what helped me to be emboldened to stand up for things that I believe in. And so I started with Burmese, specifically Burmese activism, when I was a teenager in 2006. And I led a school walkout. I also was protesting in front of the Burmese embassy and the White House during the Saffron Revolution. So that's how I started. Currently, I am a part of USACM, which is a lobbying team. Well, we worked closely with Senator Ben Cardin to help write for the Burma Act. And there's a lot of stuff. I'm the PR person of the Freedom, Justice, Equality for Myanmar organization. And we have ground teams inside of the country, all over Myanmar. And then we also have teams in the US, where we're mostly based in the DMV area around DC.
I just wanted to touch on this because you are clearly, you're based in the United States. Your activist pedigree includes Washington, D.C., it includes Baltimore, it includes a lot of other places. And at the same time, you've also got a strong focus on the Myanmar context. How is that for you, having both that US context and that Myanmar context? How do you personally relate to that? And how is your identity shaped around that? So what I'm asking for is how do you personally see yourself? How American do you see yourself? How Burmese do you see yourself? And is that ever in conflict with the way that the people around you perceive you?
Yes, it's constantly in conflict. I see myself as Burmese. I was born in Yangon. I also see myself as a Burmese person who have traveled the world and who lived in the US, but also lived in different parts of the world. So I have a different context. The more you travel, the more you immerse yourself with other people's culture, the more you can really understand another's perspective in the world, and you can reevaluate your context that you come from. I know that when I lived in Yangon, when I was a child, I had a very different context. There's things that I value still till this day, and there's things that I see as like narrow-minded, and now I see as like different things once I'm a little bit more educated. I think that there's things inside Burmese culture that is highly homophobic, highly sexist, racist. There's levels of colorism, and that's all. A lot of it is the context of colonialism and the grappling of trying to keep your own identity and also trying to not be lesser. So if you see somebody that colonized you, you kind of have a very demented idealization of that person. And so there's that context. So when I encounter a lot of Burmese people or Myanmar people, and they say something sexist, homophobic, or racist, and I say a different view, they say it's because I'm Americanized. And I don't think so, because is just knowing the cultural context of things. The more I hung out with Native Americans here, the more I understood, oh, okay, like Myanmar is also tribal. You know, there's also a lot of things that we learned from colonization that taught us that we need to hide who we are. If you go to a Burmese restaurant in America, you use a knife and a fork. That's not how we eat. We eat with our hands. And I have no problem reclaiming that as our own and not being ashamed. So if I go to an Ethiopian place, I go to an Ethiopian household, they eat with their hands and they have no shame inside of themselves because they were not colonized. And so it's just trying to understand the context of things. Also, as you know, as someone that lives in America, I'm always othered because I look different, I think differently, I sound different. And so, you know, if I want to take care of my elderly grandmother, that's within my culture, that's within our culture, to take care of, to have this responsibility. And a lot of people are like, oh, why don't you just take her to the old folks home? That's something that I could never do because that's a duty that I have, and that's very Burmese of me, that I would like to keep and I would like to continue teaching. So there's a mix of things that I keep that I think are not toxic or colonial from our culture. There's things that I bring to other people so that they would know this is who we are, like as a people, this is who I am as a person. To people that don't really understand Burmese culture or Burmese people.
Absolutely. I think you've touched on some very important and very deep things here. When we look at culture, when we look internally, we look at our own cultures, it's very easy to simply label a culture and say, oh, I'm ashamed of my culture, or saying, oh, I'm just proud of my culture, and refusing to recognize that duality. And you see in both the Western culture and the Burmese culture, you see the positives and the negatives. And one thing that I think is very important is the ability of a culture to change, to recognize its flaws and to progress. And I think that we are definitely seeing that currently, even though we're in the midst of a terrible revolution, even though we're dealing with, once again, the massacres and the savagery of the military, the indiscriminate death. There's a lot of social progress that is currently occurring. There's a lot of recognition of ethnic minorities who had previously been marginalized and ignored by the Burma majority, now suddenly being recognized as having had very legitimate gripes. We're seeing the younger generation say, we respect the elder generation, we do, but right now this is our fight and we need to fight this. And the elder generation telling us to be quiet, let this pass, and just accept things the way they are is not going to fly. Do you see the current conflict, as terrible as it is, as a potential for much broader, much wider social change, lasting social change in the Myanmar context?
I have hope that we can get there. I think that some type of truth and reconciliation is a necessary way forward. I know that's how South Africa went forward after their revolution. And, there's a lot of things that the British has done. There's a lot of things the Japanese have done. There's a lot of things that the Burmese king has done, and to other indigenous nations. And so we have to really be able to face ourselves, not just Burma, but globally. There's a whole movement of really looking at history and the context of the history that we're in and moving forward. There's a lot of movements in America. There's a lot of movements all over the world. Right here in America, they're trying to teach critical race theory. That is very necessary. And I think within our revolution, even though it's heartbreaking and beyond ruthless, people have had enough of oppression, of totalitarianism. And so, but, you know, if you've only experienced life through those contexts, through that level of oppression and brainwashing, then it's hard to wrap your head around a new idea. And I have empathy and compassion for our people. And I think that with a lot more discussions like this, with a lot more youth-led movements, but even I don't want to be ageist. I don't think that there's so many ideas that elders have that are amazing, and there's so many ideas that young people have that are not the best because of lack of experience or whatever else, or lack of understanding of context. So I don't think that necessarily it's the youth versus the elders. I just think that there's things that if you truly want freedom, you know, you can't have freedom for one type of person. You can't have freedom for just Burmese, male, upper class people. That doesn't make any sense. You need to look at other contexts, like everybody else need to have that same type of opportunity. And how I think we can reach that is when we are accountable for past things and also current things, and being malleable and having more conversations to help shape the context of what a real revolution looks like.
Absolutely. And I notice you're talking about the past and reckoning with the past. And you're talking about the difficulty of a society, not an individual person necessarily, but an entire society changing its mindset and adapting to new concepts. But I'm wondering also about the opposite of this. When we look at the Myanmar context, we know that there is currently a very violent revolution underway. We know that in 2007, there was similarly a violent crackdown against the Saffron Revolution. Of course, in 2008, Cyclone Nargis, horrendous loss of life, which the military did very little to ameliorate. 1988, very famously. And there have been a series of attacks and crackdowns over the last 50 years, give or take. And that's only the post-independence history of the country. Do you feel that there is an extent to which this repeated cycle of violence and oppression has left a very deep psychological mark on Burmese society, on Myanmar society, and has, in a sense, oriented the mentality of society in a certain direction?
Yeah, I do. It's trauma. There's so much trauma, and I think that that's why we need to address it. If we don't face something, it will repeat. If we don't learn from history, it does repeat. It's only natural if the lesson is not learned, then some other type of way of oppression continues or endures. So I think like being critical about that is necessary, but also like emboldening your compassion for people, because most people do not have mental health access, and that is very detrimental. There's intergenerational trauma, and this intergenerational trauma like has been going on for a long time, for 60 years of oppression, and then from the military, from the junta, and then before that with two colonizers, and then before that with the kings, and like separating of the different nations. So people still are fighting with all of those things that are not addressed in their psyche. And there's a lot of strength and resilience in our people. And I do think that once we address these issues internally and also externally, internally with the individual self, with the willingness to listen, and also to externally have these conversations to deepen a type of cultural change. But not only that, there's like within the military, there's a lot of brainwashing from from having women. There's a lot of sexism in that too. A woman would get married to a soldier, and if she is not the servant of a higher ranking soldier's wife, then her husband could potentially be put in a more dangerous situation. And if he passes away, there's a lottery system where her name gets put in, and a single soldier will draw from that lottery system. And if he pulls out her name, he marries her. That is, that's the type of brainwashing and sexism. All of these things are very intersectional, and all of this, because it's not addressed on both sides, there's this trauma.
I mean, you're talking about the military, and I think it's I want to call it fascinating, but it's also just revolting in its way. The way that women are seen within military culture. I've personally conjectured many times that the Damado, the Myanmar military, would qualify as a cult in the way that it operates. And women seem to be integral possessions within that structure. Women are vessels of rank. You marry a higher ranking officer's daughter or sister. They produce children that will become future soldiers. And they are basically sent off, as you've said, as domestic servants to the wives of superior officers in order to earn favor. It's a terrible, terrible life, and yet there's an even more fascinating element of this sexism. And I'm sure you were following this back in February or March. The Tamain Kantat, the barriers of women's clothing that was strung up across the streets in Yangon. Do you have any thoughts on that particular tradition and the way in which, specifically, the youthful protesters draped themselves in women's clothing as a protest against societal norms, while the military refused to walk underneath women's clothing?
Yeah, so that is right there. Huge traumatic sexist wound, right? So my specific opinion is that within Burmese Buddhism, the lower part of your body is considered ponnene, which means that it will take away your power, your strength. So if you're wearing a tame, which is the lower garb, and it's a women's garb, in a lot of Burmese culture, there's a lot of sexism intertwined with religion. And this garb is like, for the youth, this was like a liberation. This is my tame, and it's not diminishing. This is my resistance. This is me as a woman, saying that I'm strong and we are resisting against this totalitarian damaro. But they refuse to walk under there because there's this belief that if a man walks underneath a woman's any type of lower garment below the hip, that he will have less power. That means that he could potentially be killed easier. He would have bad luck. There's like a whole range of things, right? That also goes into protest out in DC. There was a very empowered woman who was holding her tame, and she's younger, and she was waving the flag, waving the tame as a flag, and she's like, yeah. And while that was happening, there was also a protester who was a man in his 40s who took her Tamang flag out of her hand, put it on top of Myanmar, the general Myanmar's face, who was on the ground that people were stomping on, and he put her Tamang on top of it, and he started spitting and stomping on her Tamang, and with Myanmar underneath. And I was the MC, and I yelled at him in front of hundreds of people, because this is our culture, that this is the disconnect, because it's not just Damero, like this is what we need to change as people. So yes, Damero is horrible. Genocide is beyond atrocious, and oppression is beyond atrocious. I'm talking about, once we get this freedom, what are we going to do with it? And when there's two people fighting for freedom, there's two people fighting against totalitarianism in the same space. And this is what he does, right? So this is the type of backwards thinking that we need to, rise above from. And that only happens with internal analysis and more conversations.
Absolutely. And I think it's a very poignant and very important point to sort of say it's not enough to win. Winning doesn't mean anything if you're not creating something better, if you're not walking away from it in that way. And I think that there's a lot to be said for the difference between the two factions, I wouldn't even say factions, the difference between the two fundamental ideologies. And the Tamang is just one example. As I said, some of the male youth, wore the Tamang as a sign of protest, while we saw the military and the police gathering Tamang and burning them in the cities. And this goes all the way back to Anoyata, who was allegedly undermined. His pawn was taken away by Tamang that were thrown onto his, effigy, and he was gored to death by wild beasts as a result. We saw women in Yangon using even menstrual pads to repel the military, which they were absolutely terrified of. And we're seeing these changes, but what's really, really beautiful about this is that the protesters are reacting non-violently. They're using Tamang. They're using superstition, curses even, against Myanmar and the high-ranking military, black magic, as it were. And there's a lot to be said about being better morally. And I want to touch back on what you said previously. You were talking about truth and reconciliation, which happened in South Africa. And similar processes happened in Liberia and in Rwanda after their respective crises. And I think it's very important to note that the people who are on the side of democracy are not talking about retribution. They're not talking about lynch mobs. They're not talking about perpetuating the same cycle of terror. They're talking about justice. They're talking about the rule of law and answering for your crimes, not just suffering the vengeance and the anger of your victims. How important do you think it is that the pro-democracy movement maintains the moral high ground throughout this conflict?
I think it's very important. And though I understand, if your child has been taken away from you and you feel angry about it, and that's a very normal feeling to have. And revenge is a very normal human trait. But to ask for equality, and to ask for all of these ideals, like we need to be better than who we're fighting against. If somebody, I'm not saying turn the other cheek, I'm saying there's multiple ways of activism, like you were saying about the menstrual pads. Use their sexism against them. There's so many clever ways to do something without being violent, and I think that's very important. Though I do understand the anger behind it. I think when a person is angry, it's like being blacked out drunk. You you have no actual recollection or control of what you're doing because you're just consumed by this poison that you've drank.
Absolutely. And that's really the genesis of it. I think everyone will convince themselves in one instance that they're doing the right thing, that they can't help other people if they're not in a position of power, to justify seeking that position of power, pathologically. But in the end of the day, if you're no better than the people you're replacing, then what was the point? So I want to move a little bit back to you personally and your activism. And one of the most important elements of your activism, and I don't want to diminish the other things that you do, because you do a lot for a lot of marginalized communities. And the one that impressed me the most actually is working for the exoneration of death row inmates, which I think is a beautiful thing to do, and it's very depressing that it needs to be done, because the justice system is so flawed in many ways. But I want to focus specifically on the Burma Act. So this is an important piece of potential legislation currently sitting before the U.S. Congress. Would you like to talk a little bit about what that is and what you've been doing to try and help this move forward?
Yeah. So the Burma Act was created by our team, USACM, and there's so many people on this team coming from all of these other pro-democracy for Myanmar teams all over the U.S. And it all started with Mama Min. She is a voter in Maryland, and she was the one that got her foot in the door with Senator Ben Cardin, and that's when we started to have conversations with him and other senators and other Congress people and ambassadors to push for cutting the monetary fund of the Damara, because you can't have a civil war without funds. And if we sanction MOGE, which is a huge gas conglomerate, and Chevron is one of the companies in the U.S. that is directly profiting from our people's genocide. Once we cut that money line and there's a sanction involved, that's very powerful to fight against the Damara, the junta. And another thing is to prevent to influence the IMF to not fund, to not loan money to the military, which is also very important. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Another push is to help people that are running and escaping from our country to bordering countries. And since some of the bordering countries are a part of ASEAN, they are more in cahoots with the military. And so even if people somehow make it out and there's a warrant for their arrest, or there's a shoot to kill order, they can still be sent back. And that's very unfortunate. And so that is, to help the people that are escaping is very important. It's very vital.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wouldn't even call it unfortunate. I would call it a miscarriage of justice, and a violation of international human rights and refugee conventions. So it's truly horrendous that this is the situation that we're in. And I think that a lot of people are a little bit despondent right now. A lot of people are looking at the situation on the ground, and they're asking the question, like, why aren't we focused on ground operations? Why are we off in the political realm? Why are we giving speeches? Why are we shaking hands? Why are we doing these things? But it's important to remember the role that this sort of activism plays and that the political process plays. Yes, it is glacially slow. Yes, there is a lot of self-interest involved. But as you say, if we can convince governments, not necessarily to support the NUG and oppose the military, but to at very least protect the rights of individual people, to not allow the situation to deteriorate, to not fund the military, that's a huge step forward. And the bottom line is, as you know, you were pointing out as well, money. The military needs money. Everybody needs money. Money wins conflicts. And of course, this weekend we have the art auction, Artists Against Tyranny. Our hope is also to raise money, not to buy weapons, not to buy bombs, not to kill people, but to help the victims of the military, to help the people who don't have shelter, to help the people who don't have food, to help the people who have nowhere left to run and are literally in fear for their lives. And I just want to remind everyone that that's going on. And I want to move on to your personal artistic side as well, because you're contributing a work to the art show this weekend as well, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I think I have time for one poem, so one or two. So I'm not sure, but yeah, I'm contributing a work. I am the first Burmese American to represent the state of Maryland in the HBO's Brave New Voices competition. And we made it to semifinals, but we got defeated by Hawaii.
Fair enough.
Almost there. No cigar yet. But but so yeah. So poetry is a really good medium for honest reflection for me, and also like it's a way I can totally say what I feel without anything to encumber me. So I think it's very powerful. You know, I have a very nuanced perspective of things, so my poetry is not everyone's cup of tea, but I think that's I think that's necessary.
And I mean, absolutely. Like, art has to be subjective, and there are tastes, but ultimately the purpose of art is not to be pleasant. It's not to be polite and appeal to everyone. The purpose of art is to convey human experience to a human mind quickly and effectively. And sometimes that requires an intrusion. Sometimes that requires that we convey something that someone doesn't necessarily want to accept. Not necessarily something they don't want to hear. They hear it every day. They just don't want to accept that it is part of their everyday lives. Do you feel that poetry in particular, but art more generally, is a tool through which we can focus on injustices and process them personally or societally?
Yeah, that's what spoken word is about. So spoken word poetry is very different than having a reading or writing poetry in a book. It's more performative. And globally, the way spoken word poetry works is it's very geared towards activism. So I think that it's not just activism on geopolitical scales, but it's activism, you know, with just combating all of the things we wish we can better in society. I think that's like very nuanced. There's also like love poems and all these other things, but you know, even self-love is very radical. So that is yeah, that's what I for the Black Lives Matter movement. I performed a poem in front of the monument, and it was called "Haka on Your White Supremacy," and that poem did not go well with the police, but but it went well with people that were walking by, and they just paused and reflected, rather than us just shouting and passerbys just like hearing bits and pieces of shouting. If you're sitting there and or you're standing and you hear somebody performing a poem and they pause and they it's sort of like very nuanced. It's very similar to this spoken word poetry came from beatniks, and a lot of like the Dead Poet Society, a lot of hip hop influence, jazz. So that type of activism is already there, and it's more inviting for people to listen.
Absolutely. And I find that it is quite a unique art. And poetry exists in so many forms, and I think spoken word poetry sort of feels to me like poetry the way that it was designed. I remember when we studied poetry back in high school, and back then we were young, we didn't understand or appreciate poetry as we should have. And I remember my teacher telling me, the reason you don't like the poem is because you're reading it off a page. And poetry was never meant to be read. Poetry was meant to be heard. It was meant to be experienced. It isn't just a series of words. There is a musicality and a rhythm to it. And there are a lot of poets who, for me personally, they may not be very well known in the spoken word poetry circles, but Bo Sia, Julian Curry, I found their commentaries on racial experiences. Julian Curry is African American, Bo Sia is Asian American, to be really poignant and really powerful, and expressing a point in a 3-minute performance, which otherwise would have taken an hour-long lecture and would have turned a lot of people off. But through poetry, you grasp the emotion behind why the point is being made and the context in which it is being made, significantly more than in another way. Do you feel that poetry, even compared with other forms of art, has this uncanny ability to just cut through and push discourse in ways that other things just don't seem to?
Yeah, most definitely. It's like cutting cheese with a hot knife. It's easier. Um, it does make everything more concise and more palatable. And it's palatable because it creates a level of discomfort. And so you're like, ooh, what is this? But it's concise. So it's like, it's easier to hear than a 2-hour lecture about the same topic. And it's more to, there's a lot of different tools. There's cadence, which you don't get when you're reading. You don't get what the author was intending. If you don't mind, do you think I can read that poem that I performed in the Black Lives Matter?
I mean, absolutely. I was kind of hoping you would grace us with a poetic performance, but I didn't want to impose.
Oh no, you're not imposing. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context. So I wrote this poem to give a little context because I was very tired of white supremacy. So this poem is against white supremacy. So it's called Haka on Your White Supremacy. I wish I could squirt blood out of my eyes like a lizard does for protection. Sometimes my frustration at white ignorance gets carried away. But I'd rather bloody your little white lies, bloody delusional and your white privilege bliss bubble, your white cotton trying to damn us, damn our menstrual flow from which we came. We came from bodies bloodied with ancestry, yet brown people are deemed too emotional. I would posit that you're too apathetic, your families have participated, and you personally are still profiting from Native genocide, enslaved Black people, treated Black people subhuman, lined them up, auction block these beautiful Black people, tell them they're ugly generationally, force a standard of beauty based on you, sell body parts, tear apart families, silence their languages, take away their religion, dangle hope of white Jesus saving them. Hope is a nice carrot. Keep hope alive, but stop doing. Keep hope alive, yet atrophy educational access. Keep hope alive, yet let's feed my students with your nutritionally deficient food. Keep starving my students with your white wonder bread. Keep hope alive and stop promoting critical thinking. Keep hope alive and stop reading government policy. That shit is too confusing anyways. Let's distract everybody with sports and social media. Keep hope alive, people. But Black people are being murdered back then and now. Black people are dying. And this is a quote. All people will die one day. Blacklist them as criminals. Black people are enslaved in the prison pipeline. This is another quote. Oh, they probably did something to deserve it. A dime bag traded in for life for-profit prison. There's white people in jail too. Hashtag all lives matter. Your white noise is microaggression. Do you know many of my friends are filled with questions of family trees, Black people relying on Ancestry.com to decipher their own heritage. Line them up. Enslave these slanted eyes. We are expendable. Hammer clinks on the side of railroads in the West. The clinking sound became a racial slur for Asians. Pat yourself on the back for your white wit. Asian bodies are still buried underground under the railroads that they built. But we're not real minorities. Look at our success. We're not proof of your melting pot working. Ugh, it tastes like every Asian man casted as a sidekick, but never a lead. He's only good for sidekicks. He's used for comedy relief. Give Asian characters to white people with tape around their eyes. Ugh, it tastes like Keanu Reeves playing Buddha. Ugh, it tastes like my middle school. Dasu, join math club instead of spoken word poetry. You're not a real minority, and this program's for real minorities. This melting pot has me wondering why I'm always asked where I'm from, China or Japan. Yes, you know, all Asians only come from the northern part of the continent. Your model minority was suspected as a prostitute in Ashburn, Virginia, because I have an Asian name. You know, I went to college so I can be stereotyped as a sex-trafficked woman. Only good for happy endings. Look, ma, no more glass ceiling or racial profiling. Look at how well we're treated. Asians are modeled minorities. Why can't other minorities be submissive like us? You cannot use our success to gaslight other minorities oppressed. We're not your modeled minority. Line them up, cut off native hair in the 1700s, deem their culture savage, steal their children, ship them to boarding schools, silence native languages, so the next generation will forget how to communicate with their elders. Trade their moccasins for your loafers. Your ancestors will continue stealing. You know, Elizabeth Warren, the Cherokee princess, wore a cheap headdress as a fashion statement. It's not savage if it's on your head. Make racist headbands in elementary schools. Your Thanksgiving is based on massacres. You know, my friends, every Thanksgiving go to honor their ancestors in front of Plymouth Rock. Every year. If it's so equal and about gratefulness, then how come in Thanksgiving meals there's nothing native in the menu? Thought it was two cultures who came together for a meal. Was Thanksgiving another white lie? Divvy up their land after you steal and plant a flag. Give nomadic people a plot of land to live in. Tell them to farm when it's not their custom. Further down the generations, your ancestors will remain taking, bulldoze native people's graves for fossil fuels. The XL pipeline is currently leaking as I speak. Trail of broken treaties, fallen tears, and now pipelines. Our melanin, our activated charcoal chests turned into diamonds with all that generational pressure, the weight of oppression. You said our expression is aggressive. Our diamond voice box cutter cuts with precision. Our expression deemed too violent. Our expression matches our daily experience. You want to continue taking and appropriating minority cultures. I want to haka you out of your veiled racism. I want to Kali your white supremacy. I want to ignite your apathy in Pele's volcano. I want you to carry your internal and generational oppression. I want to drown your subconscious oppression in the clarity of Yamaya's water. I feel juxtaposed. I want to be optimistic in your potential. I want everyone to truly be equal, even you who are oppressing us. You who have been benefiting from white privilege, I simply and wholeheartedly want everyone to find peace. And I'm not a martyr, enlightened or fully balanced. And not all medicine is sweet and welcoming. I will no longer be your on-call teacher. Don't gaslight me with my own culture. Don't explain away my rape and how I'm attracting rape vibes with my karma. How if I was a little bit more bodhisattva, if I was a little less angry, I build a bridge. I cannot speak delicately all the time to placate your guilt. I'm not even asking you to be guilty. I'm asking you to reflect Is there something in the way of seeing yourself clearly in the mirror? Until then, I wish I could squirt blood out of my eyes like a lizard does for protection. Sometimes my frustration and white ignorance gets carried away.
I think that was an excellent example of why poetry cuts through discourse in a way that a speech just wouldn't. And there's just one piece. Keanu Reeves playing Buddha.
Yeah.
That one took me off balance. I'm not going to lie. Was that a reference to a specific movie, or was that just an outlandish comparison?
No, it's a movie. All of these things that I said was historically true.
So yeah, most of them I recognized, but that was new to me.
Yeah, he tanned himself and he spoke with a weird fake Indian accent. And he had he played Buddha with tape around his eye.
I legitimately thought you just created an outlandish example, because that...
Yeah, even Halle Berry from Cloud Atlas, she had tape around her eyes when she was reincarnated as a Japanese person.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember the controversy about that. The title, so Haka on Your White Supremacy, that's a reference to the Maori Haka tradition?
Yes, it is. I have some Maori friends, and they, I asked, I was like, is this okay if I can use this? Would it be seen as disrespectful? And they said, no, a haka is like your poem is a haka. Because they were saying that it's a dance to to be healing, but it's also a dance to show that your people and your family is not to be messed with. And so, yeah.
No, it's a very powerful element. The haka particularly, I find them very powerful because there are haka for grieving and for funerary rites. There are haka for celebration. There's haka for conflict. There are so many different types. They're just much like poetry. The haka is an expression of raw emotion in a very direct and powerful way that sort of demands not to be interrupted. Discourse is interrupted. Poetry demands not to be interrupted. A haka demands not to be interrupted. It's an expression, and you can choose to leave or you can choose to experience it, but you will experience it on the terms in which it is being presented to you. You will not modify and change it in the presentation. And I think that that's a very important distinction in the ways that we traditionally approach discourse and disagreements within that discourse. So I just wanted to ask quickly, do you find that the activism that you do and the social movements and the way that your art relates to the social movements of the Eastern context and the Western context that you find yourself in are more similar or more different to one another?
Do you mind rephrasing the question?
So, okay, absolutely. So do you find, as you utilize art to deal with social injustices and to try and heal those social wounds, do you find that the types of issues and the ways that those issues can be approached in the US context and in the Myanmar context are reasonably similar to one another? Or do you find that they are diametrically opposed and they need to have very different types of approaches and very different types of art?
I think they are similar because in Myanmar there's a tradition called Tanja in our New Year's, our water festival, and people every year they air out their grievances in spoken word performances. It's usually group performances, or sometimes it's by themselves. And so this is to me, spoken word poetry is tanja. So if you just know how to describe what you're doing, then people are like, oh, okay, it's not the traditional prose or boring read off a book. It's like I'm performing it to you, except I'm not on a manda, which is like a stage, right? So I think with that, yeah, I think it's very similar. There's certain things because I'm younger, because I'm a woman, in both cultures, in the U.S. and in Myanmar, and globally, like it's going to be my art is going to be taken less seriously. So that's there.
Absolutely. So I just have one final question. What do you think is the role of art in the current conflict? How can art best be utilized in the current Myanmar context?
Art is a powerful motivator. I think it's a very powerful tool. So I think with poetry, I think what we said earlier, we can cut straight to the raw message behind something. And with visual art, I remember when I was in London and I saw an ex-political prisoner who snuck his pieces out, and he was painting with syringes and hand prison-made paint that showed like how they were treated and how he felt, and I think that's very powerful. It describes your experience and connects the human experience. We might not have the same experience, but you can look at something and you can feel something from it, or you can hear something and feel something from it. And good art moves you. So I think revolution and art goes hand in hand because it's meant to move people.
So you're from a small region in Sagaing, which is in the northwest of the country. And anyone who has been following the news will know that Sagaing has seen some very terrible crimes committed by the military. Can you tell us what it's like for the people in Sagaing right now, suffering under the military dictatorship?
Well, actually, Sakai region is it was obviously a peaceful region, we can say. It is also like where the most Burma people live, and there is a saying in Myanmar from the people from the lower Burma says our region, they call our region Anya. It means Upper Burma. So the people from Upper Burma, they call Anyara. So Anyara, the people from Upper Burma are really honest, and they are mostly farmers only. And, they are, how can I say, they are just, living in a very peaceful, calm life, and not following many pathways for the physical developments. So just living in a small and very simple life. So anyway, after even how peaceful it was is many ethnicities from other regions and states, especially from the hilly areas, they might even see Burma people are getting freedom and democracy, you know, except their regions. So, but obviously after the coup, the people from this region also suffers, not only after the coup, but also over the last decades. Even, talking about my personal life, I was, from a family member. I was a member of a family where there are NLD party members. My grandpa is the patron of NLD since 1988, and my brother is also a member. My eldest brother, he followed he accompanied in a in a campaign in 2003. Many people knows that Tapayan trip. So it's like, so my family, shortly my family, suffers, the over, the threats and operations by the military over the last decades. Not only my family but also the people who are mostly farmers and very rural people. After the coup, even in my small town, one person got dead by gunshots. And in our history, if you may see the Wikipedia articles, Myanmar encyclopedia. Our town is a very peaceful town in the country, and where there was no suffering from the World War II as well. In the World War II, our town even didn't suffer any, damages by the war. But we usually got proud of that. But now, after the coup in March, I remember March 16th. On March 16th, one protester leader who was protesting, peacefully at a nighttime protest, he was gunshot and killed. And the people who have witnessed this event cannot feel, you know, any longer patience, cannot bear this event to see. Very, we have very soft hearts, but for now, the operation by the coup gender is, not acceptable by any means. For those people who lived in a peaceful life. And then finally, in our region, the people who are, very peaceful, they started to be against, especially to fight back the coup agenda. So it means, our region is, full of the, heroes in history, and also right now even. So they are very special, different from other regions because of the geographic locations, and next to the, next to India, and next to the border to India, and also very close to Chin State and Kachin State. So the people are now, fighting, especially, in armed waves, okay, in armed means.
But at the same time, and this is very interesting. So today, when we're recording this, it's the 10th of December, 2021, and there is a nationwide silent strike where businesses are closed, people refuse to leave their homes, and they're protesting against the military, not only not violently, but also protesting with complete silence. Can you tell us a little bit about this practice?
Sure. Just today, you know, even for me, I'm not mostly active on social media, but my family members told me yesterday that today is a silent strike, and I did not expect, even, people are now forgetting how brutal the gender is, in March and in March and February, 9 to 10 months ago. So, but I was surprised by the fact that this morning when I went to the market, and everywhere I saw, you may even now hear no voice, no sound, no noise or the traffic. You know, uh, all the shops, all the tea shops and all the restaurants and all the stores and all, even, the vendors who carry their vegetables and beans and go around the town, and even they don't come to the market, they don't even sell, and all the traffic is now, silent. And I was surprised. Oh, our people are united, and we can show up our wish not to live under the coup, under the military rule, by means of the silent means. So I was surprised, and especially let me say, I'm living by a big road, so it is very usually heavy traffic, and you will see the noises of the traffic in the other days, in the previous days, but not today. I even didn't expect that would be that much united. Our people are to show up their wish to, although we cannot speak up.
And I think it's really important that you say that you cannot speak up, because we have such terrible examples of censorship. Not just the government, telling people, "Oh, you can't say this," but the government killing people, or rather the military, I should say, killing people, artists and writers for criticizing them. And for you as, I think we could say, an amateur journalist and a writer, what is that like, knowing that you live in a country where people are being killed for expressing their opinions?
Obviously, you know, when the coup junta started to crack down their peaceful protests, even in my small village, even in my small town, the people, you know, the people were very, at the time, very active, and all the people came out on the roads. And then at the time, I was also, reporting to the local news media, and then, by sending the videos or, photos secretly. So for that, we had to do it secretly, not publicly. So for me, I can say that I am safe now because I did not do it publicly. But for the other friends, I know, especially for the protest leaders, who is my cousin and my friends, they have already been arrested, and then we have no news from them, and then even uh, from okay, for example, a teacher who I know, who is joining civil disobedience movement, she is still hiding. Many people, not only she, many friends of mine are still hiding from the you know military. So it means like, if we can show publicly, you know, for example, I am safe and I am pretending I am living like a normal person and not a public, uh, not a public figure, just doing my citizen jobs, as a citizen journalist, and sometimes I just texted to my international friends what is happening in my area right now, and I just like that, very secretly. So I can live safe at the time. But I have to be careful, even to post, to write something on Facebook or whatever. I must be very careful. I have many friends who speak up, or even on social media and Facebook. You know, the secret informers from from the military side. they informed the police, other, you know, they informed, and this guy is fighting this, and then very recently, maybe a few hours later, and then that man was arrested. That guy was arrested. So even to speak up, it is, not only to speak up, but also to show up by other means, like writing on Facebook. So the freedom of expression is totally lost at this time.
And I think this is a very important weapon for the military, because if the international community does not know the things that they are doing, then the international community cannot stop them. So to you, and you continue to write, you continue to inform the international community through your writing of the situation that is happening, and of your perspective. How important is it that people continue to spread information and they continue to inform the world of what the military does?
Yep. As for the military, as for the military junta, they want to totally block out the internet, obviously. But they cannot also, do this because of the international, organizations and governments open statements against their, against this freedom of expression. So international communities are also pointing out not to block out the internet totally, but they try and other options. For example, right now they are increasing the prices of internet data packages, and trying to trace the Facebook accounts who are very active and speak up against them. So something like that. So they are also watching. They are also watching as much as they can. Who is spreading the information? Who is, speaking up, and something like that. So for the citizens, we also have to be. Sometimes some people do not accept any new friends. We don't dare to accept any new friends. So we are sharing the information only in our communities who are very close and very friendly to us, and something like that. So we have to share our information to our friends. Even if we share the information from our friends to friends of friends, it can be dangerous. In the friends of friends, there can be the secret informers that can inform the coup gender, the military forces. Let me only call them evils. And hereafter, I don't want to say that word military coup or coup gender. I will say, okay, evils, they are really evils. So anyway, so to share the information, we have still some, the internet. We have only a few mode. For example, I'm also use the cellular networks, also Wi-Fi. So for the cellular networks, they are increasing the prices. So this is obviously the reasons behind the increase of prices are their arrangement. They are this is invisible hands behind this reason. So anyway, to share the information, we have to only rely on the social media, and also just phone calls. Even phone calls are not safe anymore, because we can be tracked. So we are using some other encrypted apps instead of Facebook Messenger and other apps, encrypted apps, to be safer in speaking and communicating. So some people are also not having the internet connection in some areas in my region. So they are just texting. they are texting, SMS messages to share the news and something like that. So this is really happening in my region. So for the people, some people especially for the older people who don't have any Facebook account or who don't have any phone, they also have to listen to the radio radio news secretly, very secretly. We cannot turn on them, speaker very loudly. Even the group chat blocked the local news like Myanmar news and also the satellites, PSI satellites from Thailand. They also block out, and then they want from one house to another house to check if there is a blue, if there is a black satellite, which means PSI satellite. So we cannot watch the news publicly. We can, but some for the people, secretly watching such kinds of news, local news, who are giving the real ground information, reality ground information, and also listening to the radio news, like just like only very few, a handful local news media. So but anyway, we are still having the information what is happening in country and in our region.
And that's, an important thing for us to maintain. It's important for us to know what is happening. And we have the deepest respect for those of you who are putting yourselves in danger to do this. But of course, the reason that we're talking today is because this weekend we have an art auction in New York, and we're hoping to raise a lot of money to help the people, the victims of the military junta, and also to raise awareness in the Western world so that people know through art exactly what is going on. How important do you think art has become in spreading awareness and helping us fight against the military?
Okay, not as a professional artist, but a major artist. The art is the art is a kind of weapon that we can show up our feelings, with no words. For example, an art, maybe something, maybe on social media, you can also see the cartoons that are joking at the evils, crazy orders not to ride on the same, not to ride two by two people on the same cycle, on the same bicycle, sorry, on the same cycle. So something like that. So they are sometimes in some cartoons there is no words, but it's only very effective and very you know very can describe very, how can I say, effectively. Okay, what are our feelings and what is happening in our country. So I mean, okay, so the art auction, I heard about the art auction from my friends, and also I was interested in joining this art auction. But for me, I'm not in painting. I'm not the artist in painting. I'm just as a an amateur writer, So I before this art auction, I was also writing some articles, to show our feelings and what is happening, and to my friends personally and individually. And sometimes I wrote some articles, for example, from the perspectives or a Buddhist perspective, for example. I even also wrote some months ago, about Mara. Mara means the one kind of spiritual divine who attacked the Lord Buddha, the enlightened one. So he was not he was not doing good merits all throughout his former lives, but the Buddha did. but he wants, he wants the throne. Let me say, okay, the throne of the Buddha under the Bo tree. Without any good merits he has done, he was just to grab, the throne in a violent way, in an unfair way, unfair way. But who success? Only the enlightened one took victory over him with non-violence. So anyway, for the people, at this very hard time, we cannot show up our feelings. We cannot show up our, wish not to live under this unfair rule. But by means of art, for example, the silent strike is also a kind of art. Today, you can see this is a kind of really, effective weapon. In other means, I have also seen, people are very good in creative, art, not as a painting, not as a writings. Even though, for example, we don't, encourage, we don't support or we don't buy, from the, we don't buy anything. We don't buy from the, the group gender supported businesses. So this is also a kind of art. And also people are sharing this information and people are following and doing against this rule. So unfair, this injustice. So anyway, you know you can also see the other kinds of art. For example, people prepare a grave. Even in my small village, they prepared a grave. It was in March, I remember. So it you know the people prepared a grave and put the flowers near the grave, and then they write, and then only the words, the name of the evil chief, you know the name of the evil chief, writing the name. So M-A-M-H-M-A-L. Okay, so the name of the evil chief. So and then they also show up even in the very remote, maybe in the forestry area, or and then they took a photo, and then they posted it on Facebook and social media, and they shared it. And then this is also kind of showing their expressed by means of art. you know many other things are creative ways, and creative ways of art. So for this art auction, you know no, everybody with a humane sense, in a humane sense, everybody knows this is an unfair, this is unfair and not justice. So the art is the weapon to show up our feeling in any creative ways. As the very young protester um, said in their slogan when we were protesting, they said, now is 2021, not 1988. So the today generations are very good and creative, and they are showing up their wishes in creative ways, rather than, they can't even expect what is going on, what are the people doing. The eagles can't expect. So the art is very important.
I want to circle back to something that you were talking about a little bit before. You were talking about Buddhist teaching and examples from history, and I know that you have written about the conflict between Buddhism and what the military is doing. And we also know that the military consider themselves to be Buddhists, and they consider themselves to be doing what is correct. How do you feel about the military's view on their actions and Buddhism?
Okay, soon after the coup in February, I was interviewed, and I said it in that interview. You know, according to the Buddhist teachings, for a ruler, there are 10 disciplines, there are 10 ethics or of a ruler. Just only measure with that only. only measure with that standard. In that time ethics of a ruler, the ruler must not be against the wish of the people. So this is the first point. They they were against the vote. They were against the wish of the people. When we show our vote in 2020 general elections, so this is the first point. They violated the Buddhist teachings of ethics of a ruler. Second, the ruler must be patient and must not be harming his people. So I said two and three. So Agoda and uh, in Pali. Okay. So Agoda means not be angry, not be hatred, whatever the people are saying or whatever, even they criticize. So against these ethics, they started to violate and crack down in violent ways. So this means they are no longer Buddhist, especially from a very, very basic of 5 bar sessions, which called Pankasila. So in Pankasila, as a Buddhist, we simply have to abstain from killing even the animals. But they have already killed many people's lives, and also they have already destroyed many people's homes and lives. So to get back to the 10 ethics of a ruler, he must not be he must be patient. He must bear the people, even though even if they are criticizing at him. So so by measuring even this small, this basic principles, this basic ethics of a ruler from the Buddha's teachings, they have already, no longer be a Buddhist, obviously. Although they are just showing, how can I say, in how they are showing in traits, traits like they are guarding the Buddha's teachings. Indeed, they must they must first remove their ego, remove their greed, remove their, how can I say, anger. They cannot do any followers, any obedience, do according to the Buddha's teaching. So this is the first thing I talked after the coup in February. So obviously the Buddha's teachings are, not to be violent, to to be patient enough, even though someone is attacking you and someone is criticizing you. As for a ruler, it must be more than more practice. It must be more practice than the normal citizens. Then you can see there are many accusations on the evils. They are pretending they are like a real Buddhist and guarding the Buddha's teachings, and you know uh, criticizing the ladies, criticizing the ladies, marriage to to a white person. So, you know, even comparing to each other, the lady did not show up, did not express, oh, I am a Buddhist and I am following and I am guarding the Buddha's teaching. She never said that. But what is she practicing and what is she doing? All are in accordance with the Buddha's teachings. She has, for example, over the last administration, she followed, she was criticized in many points, many situations, but she never responded, in a violent way and to crack down or brutally. you know she was just even arranging with meter, loving kindness and patience, something like that. So So it is obvious who is a real Buddhist or not.
Absolutely. And so, on this topic, because it is clear that you are very knowledgeable and very experienced with this, your contribution to the art auction that we have is a collection of Buddhist writings. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Would you like to speak to us a little bit about exactly what that collection is and why that's important to you?
Okay. So in in this book, you will see you will not see very much political situations about the country, but in ground you will see it reflects my letters reflect the ground situations for many of the people in our country. So in this letter, although it reflects all about Dhamma, but you can see the connection with the Dhamma, the connection between Buddha's teachings and the you know current situations. For example, one when the peaceful protest were cracked down after the peaceful protests were cracked down, especially in March and February, March and April. Okay, so people were seemed like okay they gave up it seemed people gave up and they are going back to their normal life, or they are going back to live in peaceful way, and everything is it seemed everything is running going well as normal. But when I went down to be in a rural, very remote rural area, the people who are out of the information, only just relying on the radio news. Even at that time, the people did not know how to get the news from radio as well. So, but the people did not give up in reality. They did not give up the reality. They practiced their dhamma, and, for example, to prevent, and they send their loving kindness wishes to the peaceful protesters who are still protesting and who are still fighting uh, publicly against the evils. They send their metta wishes, and they do more good deeds, and they do Dhamma practices, and they send their metta. In our Buddhist teachings, many people, especially very innocent civilians, from the very remote rural area, they believe in this. Okay, we do good deeds. We do good deeds by this. We do good deeds, and we share this with the people who are still working on, peaceful protests and fighting. So they also get the fruition of their good merits. So they are sending their loving kindness, and sometimes they invite the monks to chant Buddhist paritas and Buddhist canons. The monks chant, and then they share their merits with the people who are still working on the peaceful protest, and also the whole country to be escaped from this dark and unfair regime. So I have witnessed these situations, and related to our concerns, anxieties, when we are going to hear the noises or the you know gunshots and bomb explosions. We are we were always getting tired of feeling anxious, feeling worried, all that about these things. But to relieve at least, and also our people, people are also still wishing for the people's victory only, So they they do their merits, and they study, for example, in my letters, I studied Dhamma teachings and also related to some to our feelings and anxiety. For example, I wrote that when I was writing a letter at a very late night time, I was hearing I heard a noise of a gunshot, not a gunshot, many gunshots, and then I heard that, and I was, I have to stop my writing the letter, and but in related, to the Dhamma teachings. Oh, this is not what I hear. This is not what I hear, and this is what I am. What this is not what I am concerned. So this is nature or the mental state arising and passing away. So after contemplating this Dhamma nature, I also sent my loving kindness wish to the to the young people who are fighting back against the unfair and injustice. So this is related to Dhamma much more, but you will see it reflects the country situations and what is the normal people, what are the normal people believing, and it is very much related to Dhamma, but it reflects the country situations because of the COVID third wave. People also suffer a lot during this group after so you know above in addition to the sufferings for the coup brutal crackdowns, they also had to suffer lack of medical care from the state and very disordered situations for their health and many nightmares they have never expected.
And I think this topic that you keep coming back to, metta, um, of course, our listeners would mostly be familiar with the concept of metta, loving kindness, and it's something that plays such an important role today in this conflict, fighting the anger and the violence of the military with metta. And I think that one of the best ways of doing this is through art, because art is peaceful. Art is not violent. Art expresses an emotion. And that's what we're doing at the art auction this weekend. We're trying to fight the military non-violently. We're trying to fight the military by raising money for their victims. Can you tell us what this money would mean to people who are in Myanmar on the ground suffering under the military? How much of a difference can this help make in their lives?
In August, especially after the COVID-19 that wave, the the rural people, even not only in the rural areas but also in the town, they suffered, both sickness and also the increases, the prices increasing a lot, and also lack of medical medicine and you know you know like oxygen and whatever, everything we need. The prices are very and incomparably increasing at the time. So at that time, for the farmers, let me express because I am from the rural area. I would like to emphasize on the farmers' experiences. I studied, I have witnessed the farmers, they are, just uh, living in their peaceful normal life. But, because of the coup and COVID-19, all the markets were closed, and also, they cannot even sell their crops. They cannot even sell their crops. And, many, many crises, for example, they sell their crops in very cheap prices. And, when they buy something they need, like medicine for their family, and the prices are increasing too much. So, I have witnessed many older people and sick people in the rural areas. You know, they they were almost shortage of food. shortage of food, and also shortage of medicine. Everybody in the country suffered this. Not only that pro-democracy, people, but also even the military support. Everyone suffered this situation. The same, very similar situation, but the same situation is, lack of medicine, lack of oxygen gas, and also lack of food. Shortage of food, and many other, for a human, as for a human, even it cannot be expressed by words. Very people are, uh, shortage of food. Even some people, cannot buy a small, a small amount of rice and vegetables. They cannot even buy. So at the time, I also I was also working to contact my friends overseas, my friends from abroad, uh, telling these situations, and then so I also try to reach out there, aids. They when they get these aids, they felt like they wanted to sit down, to kneel down, and pay homage to me and the helpers. Oh, because this is a great help for them. They cried. Some older people were suffering, you know, chronic stroke. Some people were, even in very old couple. One spouse is suffering, seasonal flu, and another one is working in the farms, very, you know, and in very cheap prices. They only earn 1,000 Myanmar jets per day. So although I reach out, the humanitarian relief aids are all just a few thousands. Some people 30,000 years, but it is like a life for them. It is like a life. I have given them a life to them. They even said that, and it was very heartfelt, deeply sorrowful, and very sympathy on their situations, especially in the rural areas. So this is only a normal for a normal citizen, but also in other areas of the conflict zones, people are leaving their homes and going to the forestry areas, living in the forestry areas without any mosquito nets and other sufferings. Even we can say, in the war, our people was, suffering, and that the suffering, troubles, which no one imagined and expected as a human. So although our country is, although our country is living peacefully, but we have been, suffered. We have already suffered many sufferings, for a human.
Militer di Myanmar dan Papua sama saja. Tak puas serang warga dan tak pula sayang nyawa, kan tak pula saat malam yang berpulang akan datang. Lihat kepulan asap pada di kumpulan narak massa yang tampak teratur, berdentangan berbaur, gerak nasib berangsur, dan dibayar langsung. Palan tangan ke udara, kepala tegak penuh harap, jalan tetap terbukakan ke yang tegar berusaha.
Luar sangkar, angkat jangkar, kami muak dengan mereka yang barbar. Kami sasar sampai dasar, api dalam ring masih bakar. Mereka makar main kasar, militer naik pasar butaltar. Kami bongkar sampai akar, 5 pakar dari antar pembuat bar untuk Myanmar.
You've been listening to the Insight Myanmar podcast. We'd appreciate it very much if you could rate, review, and or share this podcast. Every little bit of feedback helps. You can also subscribe to the Insight Myanmar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. If you can't find our feed on your podcast player, please just let us know and we'll ensure it can be offered there in the future. Also, make sure to check out our website for a list of our complete episodes, including additional text, videos, and other information available at insightmyanmar.org. And I also invite you to take a look at our new nonprofit organization at betterburma.org. There was certainly a lot to talk about in this episode, and we'd like to encourage listeners to keep the discussion going. Make a post, request specific questions, and join in on discussions currently going on the Insight Myanmar podcast Facebook group. You're also most welcome to follow our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts by the same name. If you're not on social media, feel free to message us directly at info@insightmyanmar.org. Or if you'd like to start up a discussion group on another platform, let us know and we can share that forum here. Finally, we're open to suggestions about guests or topics for future episodes. So if you have someone or something in mind, please do be in touch. We would like to take this time to thank everyone who made this podcast possible. Currently, our team consists of 2 sound engineers, Mike Bink and Martin Combs. There's of course Zach Hessler, content collaborator and part-time co-host. Ken Pransky helps with editing, and a special Mongolian volunteer who is asked to remain anonymous does our social media templates. In light of the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, a number of volunteers have stepped in to lend a hand as well, and so we'd like to take this time to appreciate their effort in our time of need. And we're always on the lookout for more volunteers during this critical time, so if you'd like to contribute, definitely let us know. We'd also like to thank everyone who has assisted us in arranging for the guests we've interviewed so far. And of course, we send a big thank you to the guests themselves for agreeing to come on and share such personal, powerful stories. Finally, we're immensely grateful for the donors who made this entire thing possible. We want to remind our listeners that the opinions expressed by our guests are their own and don't necessarily reflect the host or other podcast contributors. Please also note that as we are mainly a volunteer team, we do not have the capacity to fact-check our guest interviews. By virtue of being invited on our show, there's a trust that they will be truthful and not misrepresent themselves or others. If you have any concerns about the statements made on this or other shows, please contact us. This recording is the exclusive right of Insight Myanmar podcast and may not be used without the expressed written permission of the podcast owner, which includes video, audio, written transcripts, or excerpts of any episodes. Also not meant to be used for commercial purposes. On the other hand, we're very open to collaboration, so if you have a particular idea in mind for sharing any of our podcasts or podcast-related information, please feel free to contact us with your proposal. If you would like to support our mission, we welcome your contribution. During this time of crisis, all donations now go towards supporting the protest movement in Myanmar through our new nonprofit, Better Burma. You may give by searching Better Burma on PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, GoFundMe, and Patreon, as well as via credit card at betterburma.org/donation. You can also give right on our Insight Myanmar website, as all donations given there are directed towards the same fund. And with that, we're off to work on the next show, so see you next episode.
Yes, man, justice will win.
Yeah.
既然殘暴一直被用作解決難題，人難睇，仲要人相信事在人為，全世界睇撚住你班人夾硬嚟，着撚住制服進行各種野蠻行為，四周圍都係龜，四周圍都係鬼，四周圍係人係鬼都仍然仲係咁撚迷，21世紀殺人網絡睇到好撚危，21世紀殺人現實發生喺隔離。